Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for listening in to Alexandra Joy TV. Today it is my pleasure, and I'm just thrilled to be with Jeff Carreira. Jeff is a master teacher, a philosopher, writer, lecturer, and an evolutionary pioneer. And those are just a few of the descriptors for him. He has lectured at such prestigious universities as Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, Bennington, and he's the author of 2 short books, The Miracle of Meditation and Philosophy is Not a Luxury, and I know he's got a few other in the pipeline. Welcome, Jeff, and I'm so grateful to be with you today, inquiring into lots of things, including the nature of breakthroughs, how to create them, how to sustain them, and we'll be covering some other really interesting, exciting, transformational topics. So thank you, Jeff.
So, Jeff, I was wondering, in your definition, what would you say a breakthrough is? What would you say having a breakthrough is about? What are your thoughts, feelings, considerations in the world of breakthroughs?
To me, the way that I use, I think obviously the term breakthrough could be used in different ways, but the way that I use it, particularly in the context of transformation, is that a breakthrough is when we experience a new possibility in being, which means in some domain we go beyond our previous sense of self, and we experience a different possibility for who we are that wasn't included in our previous sense of self. So we step out of our sense of self, and the way a breakthrough shows up for me is the recognition of, oh my God, who is this?
Yeah.
Who am I? Who is doing this? Because it feels foreign. It doesn't feel like me. It feels like I've stepped out of who I was and had a breakthrough into a being that, is clearly me, but is beyond my previous conception of me.
Before I ask you about a personal one that you can cite, I think the confusion comes up for people around, so they have this experience of new possibility of being, this unrecognizable self that emerges
right.
from an experience they've had. Most of the time it's from experience, but do you agree?
Yes.
How do you actualize those breakthroughs? What do you do, like from the perspective of doing, how do you make them real? How do you make them habit? How do you make them something that you can consistently be if you've become this new person, so to speak?
Right. Well, again, the way that I hold this is, the challenge of going beyond an experience of breakthrough to actual transformation is essentially the question that you're asking.
Yes.
Because the experience of breakthrough is, as we said, it's an experience of a possibility of being you that's beyond your previous conception of who you are. It's it's when you step into something that you thought was impossible and that you wouldn't have defined as you. And the challenge is that what usually happens, as you pointed out a minute ago, is that's an experience, that you step out of your previous self-concepts and you go, oh my God, who is this? But then the experience ends and you find yourself back in the familiar sense of self, trying to have the breakthrough again.
Right.
Wondering how you can have the breakthrough again. And to me, that whole problem or the whole issue of transformation rests on the question of identity. What are you identified with? And initially, when you have a breakthrough experience, you are identified with your existing sense of self, your former sense of self. So we could use the terminology of the little S self or the big S self if we want just for clarity. But you are still identified with the little s self, even though you've had an experience of a much bigger self. And the problem is that the way that you will interpret that experience is as a breakthrough experience that you, meaning the little self, had. And then you're going to try and have it again, and then you will, and when you have it, in the middle of the experience, you're going to feel like, oh my God, this is me, this is who I am. But then the experience fades, and then you go back to identifying with the smaller self. So the fundamental identity is being the lesser you that sometimes has experiences of breakthrough into a bigger you. And the switch that I think is all important is when you actually, your identity, you don't just have an experience of the fuller you, but your identity switches, and you realize that actually the bigger you is who you actually are. And sometimes you fall out of the experience of who you are into an experience of a much lesser being. But the lesser being isn't you. The lesser being becomes an experience that you're having, and your identity is anchored in the bigger being. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And if you were to put it into any kind of actionable step, and I know this is on the level of doing, so I understand where this limits us, like language assist us, like making promises to other people once you've recognized your bigger self or living in that big S self for a little while to help support you. Like, is there any tips, tricks, or strategies that you've ever used to stay in the maintenance or the sustenance of that big self?
Right. Well, one thing is, now we have to realize that my areas of breakthrough have all been in the domain of spiritual awakening.
Spirit, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which gives me a certain slant on this that probably has some applicability in other domains and maybe not others.
Right.
But one thing is, at some point, you realize that the effort that you're putting into continuing to have breakthrough experience is actually part of what is solidifying you in the identity of being the lesser being that needs a breakthrough experience. And so at some point you have to give up the need to keep having breakthrough experiences to know who you are.
So say that again. Can you say that again, sorry?
Sure. At some point, you have to let go of the need to continue to have breakthrough experiences so that you know who you are. So here's a metaphor for that.
Okay.
Imagine that you walked in front of a mirror, or I walked in front of a mirror and discovered that I was a man. Mm-hmm. And I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh my God, I'm a man. I'm having a breakthrough experience. I didn't know that this is what I was, and now I'm looking and I see that. And then you walk past the mirror and you start going, oh, I wonder if I'm still a man. And you run back to look in the mirror again, oh, good, I'm a man.
Right.
And then you walk away from the mirror. At some point you have to say, you know what, I'm a man whether I'm having the experience of seeing myself that way or not. And I'm just going to start acting like it.
So are you saying it's discipline yourself on the recognition, like staying in get stronger with the muscle of maintaining the kind of distinction of, oh, I'm a man?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course it depends on the domain that you're in, but let me go directly to my own experience. In the domain of certain awakenings that I had in the context of particularly meditation practice, I would sit. I really wanted to have awakening experiences, and I would sit for enormous numbers of hours on retreat, and I would have incredible experiences, and in those experiences I would realize who I was deeply. But when the experience faded, I would immediately feel like I needed to keep sitting or sit longer so that I could have the experience again. But at some point I realized, I've already had this experience so many times, and it's been confirmed for me over and over again who I am, that I'm no longer going to give myself the luxury of doubting who I am. And the fact that, so in that domain, the fact that I may not be experiencing my most illuminated self at any given moment is no longer going to be an excuse for me to fall into some kind of habit of uncertainty about who I am.
So would you say then at that point, because at that point, a lot of that experience for you was you were in a spiritual community, right? Kind of you had a container,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
an environment.
Right.
And I participate in the Evolutionary Collective with you, and it's an annual commitment, and there's a certain let go around just surrendering to that it's an annual commitment and what can arise just from, as you guys say, being on the inside of that commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard you say two things. I heard you said let go of the need to have a breakthrough, but would you also say that it's very helpful to be in some kind of container for yourself? I know people find different environments to do that, but some kind of container to remind you?
Absolutely. I think that's definitely true. But I wouldn't say a container to remind you,
mm-hmm.
Because I think as an individual we do and can, and if we want to transform, need to get to the point where it's not reminders that we need,
mm-hmm.
So much as we need a container that. We need a container that, because our identity doesn't only live inside of us. Our identity lives in relationship with others.
Right, and other people's view of you can actually help co-create that identity. Right.
You can only go so far on your own. And then there needs to be a container. There's going to be possibilities for transformation, probably in any domain, that are not going to become available until there is the right container of relatedness.
So it could be a relatedness with one person, or in a work situation, or in a community situation.
Right.
I love the way you say relatedness, because I also would wrap that word or use the word committed to something,
mm-hmm.
Other than just yourself.
Right.
Not the reminder is probably the wrong word, but as a way to maintain the space of the breakthrough. And
to continue to develop the breakthrough. Because you want the breakthrough to become the floor under your feet, and then you want to develop the breakthrough. You want to explore the domain that opened up in the breakthrough. You don't want to just keep recapturing, the breakthrough.
That's right. Use it or lose it, right? And
right.
We do that in relationship to ourselves, but it kind of is being on the court or playing that game of tennis is when you're in a relationship with others to help maintain it. A sports performer, I could say I'm a great tennis player all I want, but if I get out on that court and play an opponent and am terrible, right? So
mm-hmm.
Somehow is what you're saying. You've got to live life and be out there with others. And
right. And no one becomes a great tennis player except in relationship with other tennis players.
That's right.
You can't become a great tennis player on your own.
Yeah. No, I love
and
that.
Even if you are doing a sport like downhill skiing or something, I'm sure that people who attain mastery there do it in relationship to others. They're in competition with others. They're learning from others. The idea that mastery is something that we attain completely independently is just not accurate.
Yeah, that's so clear. Okay. And in terms of just a question, to help maintain that energy of a breakthrough, we just talked about being committed to something bigger than yourself, and that includes in relationship to another or work or community or something. But inside of that, as silly as it sounds, doing things like specific things, like making promises to others that you kind of are accountable to keeping.
Mm-hmm.
Even there's the good and the bad of the to-do list.
Right.
And to-do lists work for some people, and they really don't work for other people. But would you say, as strategy, it helps maintain something,
mm-hmm.
an energy that you were in, versus kind of just relating to it as the feeling?
Right.
that you got to in a particular stop?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, I think, I don't know that there's a pre-prescribed way to do that, but it's definitely true that, that a big piece of the formula for stabilizing your breakthroughs could be stated as realize and respond. So you have to realize who you are in the context of a breakthrough, and then you need to take action.
Okay. That
solidifies that reality.
Great.
Because if you don't take action, it just lives in your mind, and you won't be able to hold it. And action includes both physical acts, as you said, promises, decisions, and also language. How are you going to refer to yourself? What language are you going to use? What sentences are you willing to say now that you weren't willing to say before? What sentences are you no longer going to use to refer to yourself? Now that you're on the other side of this, and that's huge. You really have to recreate. You realize a new possibility for yourself, but then you have to recreate yourself and recreate the world around that new possibility so that it becomes stable, in an environment.
That's great. I just wrote this formula: recreate yourself plus recreate the world equals stabilization. So helpful what you're saying, because the way that I've looped it is breakthroughs lead to action, lead to results, lead to breakdowns that need to new problem-solving capabilities to create the breakthrough, to create the action, results, and the error. It's just a loop. But in between breakthroughs and action, or taking the action, is this requirement that you just said: recreating yourself, recreating the world, and stabilization. So the action helps stabilize. Right. Would you say that that's correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your choices, the choices that you make. And there's different levels of breakthrough. I think, so a breakthrough is always a breakthrough for you. So that means that you are a particular person, and we have to realize that when whoever we are, we're not independent from the world that we exist in. So we are a person that lives in a world, and that person is being supported and almost held in place by the world, and that world is being supported and held in place by the person. So we are inextricably part of the world that we're in. And when we have a breakthrough, we have some experience of a new us, a new person that we could be, and that's always going to be linked to a new world of possibility. Now, it may be that your breakthrough is taking you out of the world you're in into another world that already exists. So let's say, for instance, I picked up a guitar and started playing it and practiced a little bit, and in a fairly short time had a breakthrough and realized that I could actually be a great jazz performer, and I never knew that. There's a new possibility for who I am. To solidify that, I would have to make choices to start to move into that world where that person could exist. I'd have to start learning music,
lessons,
taking lessons, changing my friends. I'd have to step into that world.
Mm-hmm. That would require action.
What's that?
That would require action. Taking action.
It would require action, and it would require a shift in every aspect of your reality. It doesn't mean you'd have to give up everything, but you would definitely have to step into a new world.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking about a spiritual domain, or if we're having breakthroughs into a possibility for a world that doesn't exist yet, then there's no world for us to step into on the other side of that breakthrough. So what we have to do is find other people who have had a similar breakthrough and create the world together.
I totally understand the work I do with you in the Evolutionary Collective now. That makes total sense. That's great. So the world of a musician lives, so I would know my to-do steps and my actions. And, even as let's say I become the amazing artists in the domain of guitar playing, it's still within a certain realm of knowing. But in the world, if you're in this world of real innovation and what they call, breakthrough technology or breakthrough performance, you really do need to do how you just described if you're really going to bring something forth that doesn't exist yet, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So the last question I have for you today, and I'm hoping I can do a series of these types of questions with you over the next coming months. What, for you, would you describe in your own experience has been one of those personal breakthrough moments that has led to action results, breakdowns, more breakthroughs? Like what has, that's really shifted who you are as a human being?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I've had a number of those, as probably many people have. Mm-hmm. But I would say for me, the biggest one occurred, the biggest one was a spiritual breakthrough. And the interesting thing about that is, I was about to say it didn't take a lot of effort on my part, but that's not true. I was a very committed spiritual seeker for a long time. Of course, in the end, the breakthrough seemed to happen as a matter of grace. But the fact is, there was a lot of effort that went into producing the moment of grace. But when I was about 29, experienced a spiritual opening that really left me completely open to a possibility that I had never imagined in terms of what a human life could be about, what was possible for human beings. And, it was a spiritual experience, and it was a breakthrough experience, and I was in it for months, just wide open to a completely different possibility for the world. And as a result, I shifted everything. I mean, my life became completely different after that point than it was before. In terms of
was this when you met Andrew Cohen, or is this when you were with the Enlightenment?
It was sometime within the first few years of meeting him.
Okay.
It wasn't instantaneous upon meeting, but sometime in the first year or so, something opened up that made me realize that I had a whole other destiny to live. And I made choices, over the course of a year or two, made different choices to leave my career and, really completely changed the orientation of my life, so that there's absolutely no question that the person who was living before that point was radically altered and became the person who lived after that point.
Right. And would you say that the breakthrough was in an environment that was facilitated, or was it meditating on a mountaintop?
No, it was in a community. I was already engaged with the community, but not deeply so.
Okay. So you had a container.
It had a container, and it was in relationship. It was, I was in a circumstance where I was doing a lot of spiritual practice. I was doing a lot of solitary contemplation, but I was also spending a lot of time speaking with people about matters in that domain. So I was quite focused, and I was in a supportive environment. But I also was, at the time, I was also an engineer, and quite fully engaged with the world. So I was in a supportive environment, but I wasn't exactly separated out of the world at that point.
Interesting. So that, could it be said, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, I'm just curious, when you had that breakthrough, is that when you did how you described, you had to actually kind of uplift your environment to fit the breakthrough? You had that, and then you say you left your career and you shifted. So it's kind of how you describe what you need to do. You actually have to transform the external to match the internal, or however you say it.
Right, and the beautiful thing is, yes, you have to make the changes externally that match what the internal is. And for me, it was more than a single moment of breakthrough. It was actually a few-year period with multiple breakthroughs, and for whatever reason, I kept following through. So as another example, and this is a breakthrough that I had when I was in a retreat environment. So I was, at least for 10 days or 14 days, I was removed from the world. I was in a retreat. I was very focused, and I had a profound opening. And I realized at that point that I actually needed to leave the career that I was in, that the career that I was in was not compatible with the possibility that I was now seeing. And I also knew that when I was out of the retreat and I was back home and I was back in this career, that I wasn't going to think it was possible to leave it. And so I wrote a note to myself in a journal that said, I know that you don't think this is possible, but believe me, your entire life depends on you being willing to make a move out of the career that you're in.
That's so great.
And so, some months later, when it was time, I didn't actually have to go and look it up in my journal because I remembered writing it, and I just knew it was true. And at that time, there was nothing in me that really thought it was possible or even really thought it was necessary. But I did it anyway, and it altered the course of my life.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it takes courage. I mean, to do something as big as that takes a lot of courage.
It takes a lot of courage, and if you want huge transformation, then you have to be willing to take huge risks.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the conversations that we've had about breakthroughs, and I can't wait till our next one. And yeah, just so much love, and I love the evolutionary collective work that I'm doing with you. So thank you for that as well.
You are so welcome, and I really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much.